Please put your books and things away. It is with joy profound that I bring to you this teaching from the Lord of the World and Maitreya, from the 5 Dhyani Buddhas and Padmasambhava. I consider it the most essential teaching I could ever give to you at this point on the path of your victory. I consider it so important that I ask you to concentrate one-pointedly upon it, and therefore not to take notes, but to receive it as the nectar of the Buddha, and then take the tapes and study them and take your notes. Most essential because of greatest need, bringing great enlightenment, and therefore the keys to your victory. I believe that these 5 great keys that I shall give you, if applied by yourselves, will make the difference between your ascension and not making that ascension. Thus, I drink the elixir to your victory. It is recorded in Buddhist scripture that on a certain day when the Blessed One, our beloved Lord Gautama, dwelt at Jetavana, the garden of Anat Pindika, celestial Deva, a god, came to him in the shape of a Brahmin priest, whose countenance was bright and whose garments were white like snow. The Deva asked questions which the Blessed One answered. The Deva said, "What is the sharpest sword? What is the deadliest poison? What is the fiercest fire? What is the darkest night?" The Blessed One replied, "A word spoken in wrath is the sharpest sword. Covetousness is the deadliest poison. Passion is the fiercest fire. Ignorance is the darkest night." The Deva said, "Who gains the greatest benefit? Who loses most? Which armor is invulnerable? What is the best weapon?" The Blessed One replied, "He is the greatest gainer who gives to others, and he loses most who greedily receives without gratitude. Patience is an invulnerable armor. Wisdom is the best weapon." The Deva asked, "What causes ruin in the world? What breaks off friendships? What is the most violent fever? Who is the best physician?" The Blessed One replied, "Ignorance causes the ruin of the world. Envy and selfishness break off friendships. Hatred is the most violent fever, and the Buddha is the best physician." With these words from the heart of Gautama Buddha, I would like to introduce to you our topic for today: the 5 poisons or passions that prevent man from attaining his liberation, and the 5 Buddha physicians who provide the remedies. According to the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, there are 5 deadly poisons which are considered to be of ultimate danger to the soul's spiritual progress. The first is ignorance. The second is anger or hatred. The third is pride or egotism. The fourth, cravings, greed or passions, passionate desire or lust. And the fifth is envy or jealousy. The word poison comes from the Latin potion or potio, meaning drink or potion. It is defined as a substance, as a drug that through its chemical action usually kills, injures, or impairs an organism, as something destructive or harmful, as something that undermines, interferes with, or blights the progress, activity, or welfare of something else. Something that causes something else to become tainted, corrupted, rotten, or perverted. Something totally at variance with one's tastes or inclination. An object of aversion or abhorrence. Shantideva, the 8th century Indian sage, poet, and monk, calls these passions a monastic brotherhood or sangha of thieves. Having seized this incarnation, they rob and they destroy one's happy state of life. Eminent Tibetan Buddhist scholar Lama Govinda explains that the 5 poisons are considered to be the causes of worldly or samsaric states of existence, and that the means for the annihilation of these 5 poisons are the 5 wisdoms, the 5 wisdoms of the 5 Dhyani Buddhas. The Buddhas are therefore called the great healers or physicians of mind and soul. These are the 5 Dhyani Buddhas and their corresponding wisdoms that counteract or act as an antidote to the 5 poisons. First, Vairochana. His wisdom is the all-pervading wisdom of the Dharma Dhatu. This is the wisdom that is born of the Dharmakaya, which in this sense is the divine body of truth, or law, or absolute reality. Vairochana gives to us the wisdom of the mighty I Am presence and the great causal body. This wisdom consumes ignorance. Akshobhya brings mirror-like wisdom to consume anger or hatred. Ratnasambhava brings wisdom of equality, which consumes pride or egotism. Amitabha brings discriminating wisdom, which consumes cravings, greed, passions, lust, desire. Amoghasiddhi brings the all-accomplishing wisdom, or the wisdom of perfected action. The word Dhyani is derived from the Sanskrit dhyana, meaning meditation. The term Dhyani Buddhas is used to describe a specific group of 5 celestial Buddhas who are visualized during meditation as distinguished from historical Buddhas such as Gautama. They are also called Jinnas, meaning victors or conquerors. Tibetan Buddhists teach that the Supreme Being, called the Adi Buddha, created the Dhyani Buddhas by his meditative powers. The Dhyani Buddhas are considered to be embodiments of universal divine principles or forces. Author Francesca Fremantle describes them as 5 chief modes of energy of Buddha nature, the fully awakened consciousness. We understand these Dhyani Buddhas to be the occupants, ensouling the consciousness of the 5 secret rays, 5 rings of the causal body that surround the white fire core between the white center and the yellow sphere, in a different plane from the 7 rays. All Buddhist deities are members of the family of one of the 5 Dhyani Buddhas who releases one of the 5 secret rays. When depicted in art, these deities often have an image of their parent Dhyani Buddha in their crown. It is also taught that each Dhyani created an emanation of himself, called a Dhyani Bodhisattva, and that each of these celestial Dhyani Bodhisattvas created a Buddha as his representative and teacher on earth. The Buddha Maitreya is believed to be an emanation of the Dhyani Bodhisattva Vishvapani, who is an emanation of the Dhyani Buddha Amughasiddhi. Gautama Buddha is said to be an emanation of the Dhyani Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, who is an emanation of the Dhyani Buddha Amitabha. Each Dhyani Buddha is associated with a specific color, a mudra, a sacred symbol, a symbolic animal which supports his thrones, a sphere of action in matter, a seed syllable, or a bija syllable, the essence of the Dhyani Buddha. Tibetologist Detlef Lauf explains that the Dhyani Buddhas develop their beneficial activity within the initiate only in the measure to which the initiate succeeds in recognizing and realizing these characteristics and symbolized forces within himself. Buddhist monk and scholar Sangharakshita writes that in Buddhist tradition, by repeating the mantra and assuming the mudra of any Buddha or Bodhisattva, one can not only place oneself in correspondence or alignment with the particular order of reality which he personifies, but also one can be infused with its transcendental power. The foundational teaching on the deadliness of the 5 poisons, presented side by side with the saving power of the Dhyani Buddhas, is principally expressed in the Tibetan Buddhist sacred scripture called the Bardo Turdal, usually translated in English as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Although the text of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is used as a breviary and is read by a lama over the body of the one who has passed on, so that he will gain liberation through hearing its truths, it is also recognized as a book for the living, for initiates striving in the here and now to win their freedom from the rounds of rebirth at the end of their present life, or at least to be reborn in better circumstances for spiritual evolution in their next life. Lama Govinda emphasizes that the Bardo Turdal is a key to the innermost recesses of the human mind and a guide for initiates and for those who are seeking the spiritual path of liberation. It has value only for those who practice and realize its teaching during their lifetime. If you do not, it will not help you on your deathbed or in the hereafter. It is one of the oldest and most universal practices for the initiate to go through the experience of the death of the old man before he can be spiritually reborn as the new man. Symbolically, he must die to his past and to his old ego before he can take his place in the new spiritual life into which he has been initiated. The Tibetan Book of the Dead stresses that the training it presents is of particular importance to the living. Hold to it, read it, commit it to memory, bear it in mind properly, read it regularly thrice. Let the words and the meanings be very clear. It should be so that the words and the meanings will not be forgotten, even though 100 executioners were pursuing thee. The text of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is one of the scriptures of the Nyingma or Red Hat school of Buddhism, founded by the great Indian guru and Buddha, Padma Sambhava, our sponsor. Lama Govinda writes, according to Tibetan tradition, the Bardo Turdal is one of those works of Padma Sambhava which were secretly hidden in order to preserve them for later generations, and which were to be revealed to the world when the time was ripe. However this may be, it is a fact that during the persecution of Buddhism by Langdharma at the beginning of the 9th century A.D., innumerable books of the earliest period of Tibetan Buddhism were concealed under rocks in caves and other places to prevent their destruction. Since all members of the Buddhist order and their supporters were either killed or driven out of Tibet, most of these buried scriptures remained where they had been hidden. Many of them were recovered during the succeeding centuries and designated termas, a term derived from the Tibetan word meaning treasure. Those who discovered these spiritual treasures and propagated their teachings were called tertans, meaning revealer of treasure. The person who has passed on is read certain passages from the Tibetan Book of the Dead over a period of consecutive days. Each day the soul is instructed in what he will experience that day. He is reminded to keep his attention stayed upon the radiance of each of the Dhyani Buddhas, one after the other, and to resist the pull of the lower realms as he encounters visions of both in the after-death state. Depending on the momentum of good or bad that he has generated while in embodiment, in regard to each of the poisons, the soul will be attracted to a greater or lesser degree to the light of the Dhyani Buddhas. Evans Wentz, the compiler and editor of one translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, says, "To one after another of these divine attributes or principles innate in every human being, the deceased is introduced, as though in a symbolic drama of initiation, to test him and discover whether or not any part of his divine or Bodic nature has been developed. Full development in all the Bodic powers of the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, who are the personifications of them, leads to liberation, to Buddhahood. Partial development leads to birth in one of the happier states. For example, on the 2nd day, the Dhyani Buddha, Akshobhya, comes with his attendant bodhisattvas, including Maitreya, to appear to the soul. The text warns that a bright, radiant white light shining from the heart of the Dhyani Buddha, as well as a dull, smoke-colored light from hell, will strike against thee. Through the power of anger thou wilt beget fear and be startled at the dazzling white light, and wilt wish to flee from it. Thou wilt beget a feeling of fondness for the dull smoke-colored light from hell. Act then so that thou wilt not fear that bright, dazzling, transparent white light. Know it to be wisdom. Put thy humble and earnest faith in it. Be not fond of the dull, smoke-colored light from hell. That is the path which openeth out to receive thee because of the power of accumulated evil karma from violent anger. If thou be attracted by it, thou wilt fall into the hell worlds, and falling therein thou wilt have to endure unbearable misery, whence there is no certain time of getting out. That being an interruption to obstruct thee on the path of liberation, look not at it and avoid anger. For the soul who does not successfully respond to these first encounters, writes Evans Wentz, the bardo visions become less and less divine. The deceased sinks deeper and deeper into the morass of samsaric hallucinations. The radiances of the higher nature fade into the lights of the lower nature. Detlef Lauf further explains, the Tibetan Book of the Dead recommends meditation on the true nature of these 5 Buddhas, so that the great wisdoms of these Buddhas may take the place of the 5 negative forces. The 5 great wisdoms of the Buddhas, he says, are shining goals of spiritual transformation. I will now give to you the 5 Dhyani Buddhas and the 5 poisons. Vairoshana. Literally, his name means in shapes, making visible. He is the manifester of phenomena. His wisdom is the all-pervading wisdom of the Dharma Dhatu, the wisdom born of the Dharmakaya, the I Am presence and causal body, which consumes ignorance. His line on the cosmic clock is at 7:30. As we know, the 5 secret rays appear on the half hour from 7 to 11. At 7:30, then, we are in the Omega cycle of the 7 o'clock line and the first secret ray. Under the hierarchy of Leo, the flame of God gratitude, the seat of the soul chakra. The perversion of this great light of gratitude is ingratitude, thoughtlessness, spiritual blindness, insensitivity to life. From 7:30, we go to 8, and so this poison and its antidote go through the alpha of the 8 o'clock line. So each secret ray takes in a half of one of the hierarchies. The feminine half of the first at 7:30, the masculine half of the second at 8 o'clock. So it is the alpha flame of Virgo, God justice, in the solar plexus chakra, the perversion of which is injustice, frustration, anxiety. These two halves make the whole of the initiations on the path of the first secret ray under Vairochana. If we successfully wage war against the dweller on those lines and those very degrees of our clock, we will see coming into our lives the all-pervading wisdom of the great causal body above, and we will see being transformed or transmuted before us the poison of ignorance. The mudra of Vairochana is the teaching or setting in motion the wheel of the Dharma or law. You can take your right hand, bring the thumb and finger together, and put it on top of the left hand with the thumb and first finger together, and the other fingers are relaxed. That is the Vairochana mudra, the wheel of the law. We can see that each of the wheels is in another dimension, as we are not forming a perfect figure 8, but we are forming it at the perpendicular relationship. The Bija mantra of Vairochana is Om. So we say his seed syllable Om with his name. As we have said, Vairochana's wisdom is the all-pervading wisdom of the Dharma Dhatu, the wisdom born of the great Dharmakaya above, the divine body of truth or law, absolute God reality. This is that which conquers ignorance. The Dharma Dhatu wisdom is said to reveal the realm of highest reality. The poison of ignorance, which Vairochana's wisdom dispels, is also referred to as stupidity, sloth, or delusion. We call it ignorant animal magnetism. We know that under the 7 rays it afflicts the mental body, the second quadrant, the 3, 4, and 5 o'clock lines. The density of the mind and all that causes that density of the mind, including the very ignoring of the law itself. Detlef Lauf describes the traditional image of Vairochana as follows. He sits on a lotus over a throne with a symbol of a white lion. He characteristically holds the wheel of the teachings in his right hand, and the ritual bell, Vaganta, in his left. The wheel of the teachings is a golden color and has 8 spokes, which denote the eightfold path of the Buddhist teachings. Thus, by the knowledge of the law and the eightfold path, one releases that sacred fire to consume ignorance. Through meditation upon this Buddha Vairoshana, the earthly and profane person is transformed into the universal body of the Buddhas, the Dharmakaya. The great goal of Buddhism is enlightenment and the vanquishing of all ignorance. Buddha means enlightened one or awakened one. And when they asked Gautama as to his identity, he would answer, "I am awake." His teachings recorded in the Dhammapada repeatedly emphasize that the disciples of Gautama are always well awake. Gautama Buddha's first sermon after his enlightenment under the Bo tree, under his I Am presence, addresses the poisons of ignorance. Having withstood the temptations of the evil one Mara and his hosts, Gautama gave himself up to meditation. All the miseries of the world, the evils produced by evil deeds, and the sufferings arising therefrom, passed before his mental eye, and he thought, Surely, if living creatures saw the result of all their evil deeds, they would turn away from them in disgust. But selfhood blinds them, and they cling to their obnoxious desires. Pondering on the origin of birth and death, the enlightened one recognized that ignorance was the root of all evil. The cause of all sorrow lies at the very beginning. Remove ignorance, and you will destroy the wrong desires that rise from ignorance. As another translation of this sutra puts it, from ignorance arises the force of karma. When the origin of ignorance is extinguished, when we extinguish desire, there is no longer the force of karma, and the soul enters the path of liberation from the wheel of rebirth. For desire being extinguished, there is no desire to outpicture that force of karma, that ignorance.